Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a nice day in this sunny day in Lisbon. I've been telling everybody I met since I've gotten here that it's like 4 degrees on average in Vancouver, Canada, and I came here with like a jacket on and a sweater and a long sleeve and pants, and I was not ready for this weather at all, to say the least. And so, I think we did get to 7 degrees like the other day, so we're getting there. We're getting there. So I'm here to talk to you today about AAA games. Something that I love, something that I've played since I was a kid. I'm sure many of you here today, since you're at a games talk, also like video games. Now, video games are interesting because a lot of the time we focus on the today of video games. We focus on the now. We focus on what games are able to do next year or even the year after. But we don't often focus on what happened before, the legacy of game companies. And so I want to talk about this concept of a technological legacy. A technological legacy is the culmination of all the choices to add, remove, or change technology over the course of a company's existence. And by understanding this legacy and understanding all these choices that led up to now, we can better understand the costs associated with producing a title of the size, let's say, of FIFA. But before I really get into a legacy, I'm sure you probably want to know why I'm even here talking about this subject. So my name is Garrett Fredley. I'm a programmer and build engineer at a company in Vancouver, Canada called Phoenix Labs. But I wasn't always there. A long time ago, I went to school to study video game design. In fact, I don't really come from a computer science degree program. I don't come from a comp sci background. When I left college, I had experienced 3D modeling. I was an artist for a small period of time in high school. I studied a lot of code in school. And when I left, I was like, I really want to study or pursue like this kind of merging of art and programming. And that's what led me to my very first career working at Electronic Arts. And I started during the period of the end of FIFA 17. And I did that for about a year. I was responsible for the tools and pipelines relating to get content from Frostbite, the brand new engine which I'll be talking much about later, and the older technology for the Gen 3 platforms, Xbox 360 and PS3. And did a lot of the conversion technology for that stuff. And I'll be getting to that in a little bit as well. Ultimately, though, my last position I held at Electronic Arts was what's known as a preservation software engineer. I highly doubt anyone in this room has ever heard of that title because I was arguably the only one in EA who had that title. It's kind of a weird idea. I was the archiver. I was responsible for making sure that when a FIFA title was built, or any title in EA was built, the pieces, components, tools, technologies, pipelines, documentation, so on and so forth, was put away amongst a various group of virtual machines, if you're familiar with that virtual machine technology, and so that these virtual machines could reproduce the game in its entirety from scratch. And I did that for a couple of years. I was responsible for making sure that FIFA would be preserved. I was the historian of FIFA, if you will. But ultimately, my time at Electronic Arts came to an end. And I moved on to pursue independent development at various companies, kind of a much smaller series of developments, and I stayed in the DevOps or build automation space. And this ultimately led me down a route of understanding how technology differs when you look at AAA versus indie. Because in AAA, I'm sure many of you who played FIFA know that these games are pretty big. In fact, I want to know, who here has played FIFA at some point in their lives? Okay. If I ask that question at like a conference in Canada, it's like maybe 2-3 people hold their hand up, so make me very proud. So I want to talk about this idea of a technological legacy. And when we look at a company like Electronic Arts, they've been around for about 38 years. That company was founded in 1982. And when we think about Electronic Arts, we think of what can they do today? What can they do to make FIFA even better? But we don't know that 30 years ago, they had technology far different than we have today. The reason being is that if you look at game technology over the course of even the last 30 years, since the 90s, games are not that old. But even to that point, technology has changed drastically in those 30 years. Back in the 90s, we never had the concept of a game engine. All we had was like assembly and maybe a 2D graphics program. Everything else was built internally. What this meant was, especially for a company like Electronic Arts, who were founded in '82, everything was proprietary, everything was internal, everything had to be built in-house. There was no external shared technologies. And at first glance, this seems kind of like the average. I'm sure most people who start a studio will probably be writing their own stuff. The problem isn't that they did that. The problem is that they did that for 38 years. Because let's say when Electronic Arts started, we have a coding language, we have an art tool. Simple as that, that's all we got. I'm sure everyone in here is very excited at the prospect of living in the assembly world. Not that great. Over time, the things that you don't have today, you'll have to build. So you'll start with, let's say, a physics engine. You might have a renderer, and on the art side, you might have written an image processor or some sort of shaders that make your game look really cool. So that's pretty awesome. You have a first layer of proprietary technology. The issue is that right now you have a small layer. It's manageable. You probably have 2 programmers who've written all this stuff and they have all that knowledge in-house. Now do that for 38 more years. This will start getting worse. You'll have even more branches of proprietary technology, external technology as it becomes available. And now you're getting to this weird network of relationships between the things you've built and the things that you didn't build. And do you think that for 38 years you can keep all the information and all the developers who built this stuff in-house? Probably not. You're going to end up with some things that no one knows how to operate anymore. And the problem extends even further because this is what you start with. But as companies grow, you introduce new domains of technology, let's say pipeline tools. Now you have, let's say, 30 developers, and now you need to deliver things around the office, from myself to you and you to me. This has the same problem, proprietary versus external. But as companies grow even further, the space that I'm particularly passionate about is automation. Automation is now the rapid en masse production of content, builds, things like that. And to just give you an idea, just give you a rough number of the sort of level of automation technologies required to operate FIFA, a number that I've learned about over the last couple of years was EA produces 16 terabytes of builds a day, on average, over the course, I think about like 14 to 16 was the average for like 2 years ago. That was 2 years ago. Imagine it today. Imagine the level of technology required to do that. And then that's 38 years of that technology built up on itself. And when you look at both Electronic Arts, the stories that I'm going to share today, and all the other companies you've seen at this conference, I want you to think about the sort of legacy they're dealing with. Because any company who has lasted longer than 2 weeks, or even if it's been within 2 weeks, probably has a legacy they're dealing with. And with that in mind, I want to talk about understanding the risk that companies take on as they grow. Because just growing a company and being a company like Electronic Arts doesn't just come risk-free. Every choice you make to create technology, to take on technology, comes with a burden that you accept. Now, I want to talk about a title, and I'm curious to see how many people in this room have played it. Who here has played FIFA 17? All right. So FIFA 17 was the year of Frostbite. And this was a big year because this is a giant step up for the visual prowess of the franchise. We went from an old Ignite engine, the Ignite engine being the other proprietary engine we've written. We kind of like proprietary stuff. EA has a lot of it. And so Ignite was great. We did it. We jumped from Ignite to Frostbite. But I want you to remember something, and I'm curious to see how many people in this room know this. So we did upgrade to Frostbite for 3 of the platforms. So what we know as the Gen 4 platforms, the Xbox One, PS4, and PC, those platforms got to Frostbite. However, we never stopped supporting Ignite, meaning the Gen 3 platforms, Xbox 360 and PS3, are still being produced with Ignite. Now, at first glance, this seems trivial. Okay, sure. But who here is familiar with the concept of a game engine? Oh, that makes me so happy. So, for those who aren't familiar with the concept of game engine, the game engine is a central piece of technology that drives the production of a video game. It's technically all the aspects, the physics engine, the rendering engine, all the tools and assisted pipelines that come together to form a suite that you can use to build a video game. And when you think about the idea that a project is built off of a game engine, it is the core of that product. You associate FIFA now with Frostbite because it's such a big piece of that franchise now. Imagine supporting 2 of them. There is so much proprietary stuff you have to deal with when you're supporting two engines that leads to a lot of complications down the road. But this upgrade wasn't something we did overnight. As you can expect, especially switching engines and working on a multi-million-dollar franchise like FIFA, this was a very, very long process we had to undergo to get this done. And just to give some rough numbers, this took a lot of people. This took a huge amount of people. I'm not sure if you're aware, FIFA has hundreds and hundreds, I want to almost say over 1,000 different developers on that title. It's one of EA's, actually, it is EA's most largest and most expensive franchise. And when we were shifting to FIFA or to Frostbite, one of the realities we accepted was, I worked at the time during the artworks department, which is the central art team for the company, and I was working there as a technical artist. And I remember that the office space we had probably 100 artists in that giant warehouse-like room. We shared that space with a UFC art team. So the UFC title. We actually kicked them out of the office to another building to hire more artists for FIFA. What FIFA wants, FIFA gets. And so this was kind of a weird reality. So we hired, I want to say 40 new artists just to create the content for FIFA 17. If anyone's familiar with that title, you know that story mode came out for the newer consoles. That took you don't even want to know how much effort that took to produce not only the content, but the tools to actually build that content. And we also kind of extend this. We also did an engine upgrade. And the engine upgrade meant that we had a technology shift. And so I think we hired, I want to say 20 plus engineers just to throw bodies at the problem. It wasn't something we could just do easily, it was something that we had to do with manpower. And obviously, as you can imagine, making sure that this was going to be stable and be a great shift that wasn't going to undergo any issues, this took years. This wasn't something we considered on a Friday and was like, yeah, you know what would be kind of cool? Let's Monday, let's just shift our entire engine over. That's not really how that went. And so what we did is we had years of prep time, years where we're like, let's make sure everything's been prototyped. We have an existing copy of FIFA in Frostbite. Let's make sure it works. And that's when we were able to go, okay, now let's go spend a year to actually do it. And that, on top of the fact of all the content we made for FIFA 17, was how long and how much it costed to actually get to a new engine. And overall, this is fine. We did it, but there was always a cost associated to upgrades. My first golden rule that I've learned from FIFA, since the Frostbite upgrade, no upgrade is without cost. There is no perfect upgrade. An upgrade completely, unless you're going from 0 to 1, there is no upgrade without cost. And what I mean by that is this photo. For anyone who here has played FIFA 17, I know I'm going to shrink this list down even further, who's played FIFA 17 on the Gen 3 consoles, Xbox 360 or PS3. Perfect. This photo might seem similar to you. In FIFA, especially for the Frostbite shift, and the fact that we had to carry two engines, the content we would produce for FIFA Frostbite was not capable of being ran on FIFA Ignite, simply because the console and the hardware couldn't support it. It wasn't really a choice on our part, we had to do it. We're talking about massively scaled up files for Frostbite that we had to somehow, through the magic of technology, get to be operable on the older consoles. And so, at first glance, we'll just throw more artists at the problem. Let's just hire more artists. But in theory, if we're going to be supporting FIFA on two different engines for a very long time, this strategy won't work. Just manpower won't work. And something you're going to hear from AAA games, something that any AAA title is produced upon, is the concept of automation. As a build engineer, I love automation. If I could automate coffee being poured for me and delivered to me in bed, I would. Coffee and automation are my life. And so when you look at a concept like this, we need to somehow take 1,800 plus players, dozens of stadiums, unbelievable amounts of world content, down-res them and get them into a console that doesn't even support them. That is not something we can solve through manpower. We have to solve through automation. And so the team that I worked on during FIFA 17 was born. It is known as the downstream team. The downstream team, the sole purpose of it is to take all the tools and technologies, the assets and all the fancy things of the Frostbite work and downport it to the older engine, the tools that we built for Ignite. So what we did is we spent the year and beyond developing a bunch of conversion tools. And so when you look at these two pictures, oftentimes what would happen is that we wrote a massive suite of tools that would retopologize models, meaning down-res the vertice count. We would have texture conversion, we would have shader conversion, a lot of different weird checks that would just manipulate pretty much anything about the game we could convert to a lower form. We wrote an entire universe of pipeline to make this automated. Just by itself, that's an expensive thing to do. But it's not nearly as expensive as what it would take going manually. And so I want to take a second for us to kind of realize what this means. We talk a lot about upgrades being wonderful, being great. We should always keep pushing for the future. The problem is that, as I said earlier, no upgrade is without cost. The cost that FIFA brought on us was the fact that this thing even has to be a thing. So learn from our mistakes. Frostbite was great, but there's implications that we sometimes don't really want to have to deal with. Now I have seen Lionel Messi's face on my screen way too many times to count. Please learn from us. But FIFA 17 wasn't the only title I got a chance to work on, and it wasn't the only title that I learned a lot from. FIFA 18. Who here has played FIFA 18? Awesome. So FIFA 18, for me, was the year of Switch. It was the first time first time in a while at least, that we shifted to a new platform, the Switch. And for the most part, the Switch was actually one of the best platforms I ever got a chance to work on FIFA. The problem with the Switch inevitably came with the fact that anyone who knows about what kind of hardware drives the Switch, it's about as bad as the Gen 3 consoles. The Switch has horrible hardware. And so naturally, the Frostbite did not work on that console. So not only did we got this brand new, awesome, fresh start that was Switch, we ended up going backwards to the older engine. We doubled down on an old engine that we wrote 15 years, something years ago. It's kind of a weird idea, but we got the positive in that we now have new tools to build. It is a weird situation, but this was a chance at allowing us to rewrite some of our wrongs. You see, when you're working at a AAA company, and you're talking about a legacy, how we build a game largely stays the same over the course of a long period of time, let's say a decade. The methodology behind how FIFA gets built stayed the same over the years. When we're talking about Switch, it's like we know how to deploy games to consoles, we know how to make them to a disk, we know how to get them to users. That's not going to change. The technologies and tools, the unique pieces that went into getting a Switch build created could now be written from scratch. We had no more prior history we had to think about. This is the first time in a long time that we can think about not having to deal with a legacy. And what nice, at the time, this was when I was working as a preservation engineer working on preserving FIFA, this was the easiest thing to preserve. I was living the dream. And this was awesome, I was so happy. First time in my life I was happy. So this was great, it was easy to preserve. The reason being was that when you're talking about technology being written, one of the core things you always want to keep in mind is keep the knowledge of how it was built alive. At the time, because it was so fresh, there's documentation, there were comments in the code, the workflow documents were still alive, and the people who did it were still around. And so it was just by virtue of everything being there. It was amazing. But there's kind of a consequence with growth. A consequence that every time we focus heavily on transforming our workflows to follow the new. If we want to shift to cloud, for instance, go live in the land of Docker, for instance, we're going to have a consequence that is going to be universally applied. And for us, that was the fact that all of our older tools started breaking down. Because we were so focused on Frostbite, we were focused on the new engine, new tools, Switch, that we honestly started taking the people off of the older tools and putting them onto the new, that these older tools now no longer had caretakers. And there's a problem that comes with this. And I'm very curious to see who has heard of Bandaid fixes. Not enough of you have heard this. Bandaid fixes, my friends, is one of my least favorite parts about technology. I want to explain what Bandaid fixes are. Bandaid fixes, using an analogy that was told to me a long time ago. Last year, actually, during a conference, somebody used this analogy to describe the concept of Bandaid fixes. Bandaid fixes are like a series of pipes you'd find in your house. just like a pipeline you use at a company or use, I'm sure many of you have worked with pipelines, eventually, whether it be through a shift in code, somebody deleted something by accident, whatever it may be, a part of your pipeline breaks. For any engineer who has experience in the field, has probably seen this happen in their work. It's natural, it's normal. And so what we do typically is we say, I have the solution, I found it, I'm gonna fix it with a Band-Aid. I'm not gonna really spend a whole lot of time really analyzing the situation, understanding why it even came to be in the first place. And so you're gonna go on with your life, thinking that you're the savior of your pipeline. This doesn't really work. And those who have seen this problem before will know why it doesn't work. And it's exactly what I said earlier. You don't really know the full situation. Because inevitably, this will happen again, and again, and it'll keep happening no matter how hard you try to fix it, because a Band-Aid fix is not a solution. The problem with Band-Aid fixes is that you don't understand why it popped up. You just understand that it needs a fix. And so what we end up doing is that we want a solution. If you look at the plumbing under your house, and you look under your sink, would you be excited to see that your sink has a bunch of duct tape on it? Probably not. This is what I mean. You'd probably be like, is this pipe safe to be using? Maybe we should actually replace the pipe. Maybe we should look at the material of the pipe, understand the cause of the problems. And what we ended up doing is we kept just solving the problems as they came up. We used Band-Aid fixes probably more than anybody. I must admit that I've done this too many times to count. I'm not proud of it, but I'm here to tell you that you shouldn't do it. And what we did is we doubled down on this problem. And I hope some of you maybe have seen this, and I hope some of you have learned from this. What we did was we started to assign people to these problems. Oh, I was in there too. We started to assign people to these problems. I would one day go fix a part, I would clean it up and walk away. My peer would also go, sit down, clean it, fix it, walk away. Neither of us really knowing what we did. We'd say in a meeting I fixed the thing, cool man, and walk away. We never understood any of our solutions that came to this. So what do you think is going to happen? It's going to be doomed to repeat itself. Because that's what Band-Aid fixes are. And when you look at your own work, and when you look at your own pipelines, something that we ended up learning was that you need somebody to stick around. You need somebody to hold on to the context of the problem. When you fix something, when you solve an issue, you take on a piece of context. You know what you did. You know that there was a previous issue that was resolved by something you did. Stick around for a while. And you see this a lot in AAA games. You have people who are cycled out really frequently on short contracts. By cycling people out really frequently, you have this natural problem where the next person's not going to have the context. And then this is going to happen forever. And let's dial back to this idea of legacy. Do you want your legacy to be full of this? Do you as engineers who take pride on the code you write, for it to be looking like a big Band-Aid pipe, a pipe covered in duct tape? You probably don't. Because engineers aren't proud of that kind of stuff. We're proud of stable solutions. We're proud of extensive solutions and proper solutions. What's funny is that there's a fun joke that I like to go with a coworker of mine based on a script that he got to work with. I think it's his brother he got to work with. The code is arbitrary, so I don't have to read it, but there was a script that we had in the artworks department. There was just one script, and it was a joke amongst us. The person who wrote it was an old coworker of mine, and he wrote it as a hack. Now, there's many days where I've written code that I'm not proud of. In fact, who here has written code they're not proud of? Okay, for those of you who didn't raise your hand, I don't believe you. Everyone has written hacky code they're not proud of, code that definitely shouldn't be seen. It happens, it's natural. So what he did here was he knew that. He knew, he's like, no one should see this. I shouldn't even see that. So he wrote as a comment, please deprecate by 2017. He actually wrote in production code used in FIFA, please don't use this. And so you think, FIFA, man, they know what they're doing. No, they didn't. So surely by now, 2 years, come on. Still, no, not really. This is gonna keep going. This is the problem, is no matter whether you can identify with the things that you've done wrong, whether you know personally that you've done it wrong, if you're getting cycled out later, you'll never have time to fix it. Because the legacy will exist whether you're gone or not. So be careful about your legacy, because just because you're going doesn't mean the problems that you've left for others is going with you. This has been an interesting time for me, because this was kind of the jokes that I left Electronic Arts with. But I left a lot of things. I left with a lot of interesting lessons from Electronic Arts. One of them being that I don't trust code anymore. So frankly, maybe this will end up being a reality, and I really hope that it isn't a reality. Maybe it will be a reality. Maybe it'll be like 2060 before it's actually fixed. I don't know. Let's talk about some lessons I learned. Let's talk about lessons we should all learn from our code, and learn from each other, learn from our industries. The first one the big thing that I learned, this is really why I'm in the career that I am. Automation is required for growth. I recommend anyone in this room, and those of you who are in it right now, or those of you who are considering, or maybe you're just early in your careers and you're not really sure what to do yet, invest in automation. It is a minimum requirement to scale the way Electronic Arts does. Any AAA company you look at, if you look at conferences around the world, this is usually a theme. Somewhere in the mix, somebody says, I wrote a script to do X and Y really quickly. It's kind of a given. I recommend it. There are a lot of technologies in the world that are free, that allow you to automate your work. Start doing it today. The biggest benefit of being an engineer is we can be really lazy, because we can just make tools that do our jobs for us. To a point, don't do everything on automation, but you get the gist. Invest in automation the way AAA does. It's a given. Temporary employees leave the temporary solutions. Now, many of you are actually, you're all students, and so right now you're not technically in a company like Electronic Arts quite yet, but you're in teams. You're working with your peers, you're working with your friends, and you're working with your future coworkers. In your teams, you probably do group projects, and you're writing code for each other. Respect that by having each other around, the code you write is made more powerful because that knowledge is kept within your group. Don't just write things and expect it to last forever. The longer you keep people around, the longer you keep information living and being alive, the longer it can have an impact, and the better it can grow and scale. Upgrades can have consequences. As I alluded to earlier, not every upgrade is one that should be undergone. Many of the upgrades that I consider today, working in the automation space, there's implications far beyond the cost of doing it in the first place. Many of the cases when we talked about Frostbite, it's easy to focus on the good, focus on the positive, focus on the exciting visuals that go along with it. But as engineers, we can't let cost just be a thing we can accept easily. We have to understand that there is problems. And the last thing you want to be doing is when you have an upgrade and you're having a champagne party and you're all really excited, for your boss to walk in and say, yeah, you guys are going to have to go back to work, you broke everything. I don't say that from experience. So please, consider your upgrades. And old technology isn't dead technology. When I was going through Electronic Arts and I was working on the conversion pipeline, and I was working as a preservation engineer, a lot of that time was spent why are we working with Ignite? Why are we working, in many cases, I was working on tools that were older than I am. That's a very surreal experience. I saw scripts, whole entire pipelines from the early 2000s, late 90s. And you must ask yourself, why do we still use it? Surely there should be a replacement. And you're probably right, there probably is something that's new. But why should we upgrade? Why should we upgrade to something when we already have a totally viable working solution? Just because something is new doesn't make it valuable. Just because something is new and does the same thing something yours does, doesn't make it an obvious choice. If you already have a working solution, don't take on the expense to upgrade. Enjoy old technology. I'm sure some of you were taught classes in assembly. Still valuable to some degree. And so, a lot of the time when we talk about things like this, these lessons learned, I can just talk a lot about what things I've learned about Electronic Arts, and things I learned about FIFA, and things I learned about other games. but I want to learn with you. I want to teach you the same way I was taught by my peers. Let's talk about how we can improve our legacy. And many of you have heard the lessons in here. I'm just going to repeat them because it's the same everywhere you go. And my favorite topic to teach these days, as an educator, as a peer, I love teaching this topic. Keeping your code clean. Oh yes, I'm repeating your instructors here. I want us all to be honest to each other. We're all friends in this room. We're all friends in the tent. Who puts comments in their code? Come on, don't say there's people who have their hands down. All right. I'm glad that most of you said yes, though. And what's funny is that all of us have probably written scripts that don't have comments. I surely have. I'm not proud of it. I would still wake up in the middle of the night having nightmares about that day. But the reality of comments, something as simple as comments, makes you're still in the minority when you do that. And that's the weird part, is you think when you look at like games or look at technology, us as professionals and us who work at these companies, we would always comment. We'd always be on top of the game. We'd always want to make sure our code is going to last. As a preservation engineer, as a person who saw the history of EA, I can absolutely tell you that is not the case. We have flaws. The developers at companies have flaws. Every title you've ever worked with is built on these flaws. But the problem with not having code in your scripts is that your legacy becomes hard to work with. When we talk about code, one of the things that I've heard many times, and I'm sure some of you have done this, is you're like, wow, this code's amazing. It's like the best thing I've ever written. Guys, hear me out, I'm the best. But frankly, everyone in the room is going to like roll their eyes and say like, none of us can even read what this does. That's pretty normal. Even working at Electronic Arts, we did this all the time. The lesson that I ended up learning from this over the years is that when you take code and you spend some time to make it readable, changing class names to something that's legible, changing function names to something that can be easily understood, spending time just to make sure the others can understand your work, goes into the heart of the problem, which is you don't write code for yourself. You don't not write code so that you can be amazing. You write it so that your company can be amazing. In group projects, if you sat there wondering, wow, I hope like this code has to be great because I need to be proud of it, you're already thinking the wrong way. And you're in a group project, when you're in a company, when you're in an industry, you're writing so that your peers can succeed. You're writing so that your business can succeed. It seems like an old lesson, but it's something that you still see today. Because people want to be proud of their work. When we come together, that's when our work actually matters. And I want to share another story with code, because I'm sure I have too many stories to share. There was a script. When I was working as a technical artist, there was a script that I opened up one day, and I swear I wish I never did. All of our tools, many of our most complex conversion tools, complex art tools, called a script. And this script, in the folder directories, was the only file in a certain folder. This is already a warning. When I opened that script up, I found a truly disgusting sight. A long time ago, there was a language that was used. It was very common in the 3D modeling space. There's a software called Maya. And some of you might have heard of this software before. Maya had a proprietary language that was used called MEL, M-E-L. MEL was a functional programming language. And it's still in large use today by most companies, simply because somebody wrote it so long ago that no one knows how to get rid of it. I'm not kidding, that's an actual problem. And so when I opened the script up, there was like 3,000 lines of functional programming code with no comments and no one could understand. But everything we wrote referenced it. And I remember one day I went to one of my coworkers and I was like, what is this script doing? Because like, this seems to be the problem. And they're like, we don't ask that question here. This is the dark side of programming, and I hope that none of you do that. When we look at writing code for the majority, we're writing code so that people like me don't get scared by things like that. That's not the only lesson I learned. You all probably know to keep your code clean. I just hope this story reminds you that it's more important than you think. But there's another lesson I learned, this one a bit more technical. Compartmentalization. The realm of making sure that your tech stack is manageable. Now, in games, and most other technologies, or spaces, There are too many software, too many things. Who here knows every single logo on the screen right now? That should tell you. This is a small snippet of the things I got a chance to work with over the years. And this is like 1/100th of the type of content or the amount of tools that a company like Electronic Arts deals with. When I was working as an archiver, I got a chance to preserve a lot of these tools, and the list goes on forever. And so when you're looking at AAA, there's a certain threshold you cross when it doesn't really matter how many tools you have. Just because you're running a tech stack of 30 tools doesn't really matter anymore. Because what matters is that how do you actually manage it all? And the fundamental principle that EA and any AAA company tries to follow is the ability to maintain this. And so compartmentalization is a tool they use to do that. Compartmentalization is the idea that we're just going to have a bunch of boxes. Lots and lots of boxes. And what we do with these boxes is we just chuck the software into these boxes. I'm going to say boxes a whole lot. Because when we use the concept of boxes, it doesn't matter what tool's inside the boxes. It can just be a folder on your directory system. That's all it needs to be. We associate the documentation, the user documents that we've written, maybe the official documents by the source or by the companies, and we associate all the tools we've written, all the proprietary stuff we've created, and we just throw into that box with it. And so no longer do we think about, and it's kind of a weird analogy, but it's something that I've heard recently, is this analogy of the pet versus, oh gosh, what was it? Pet versus cattle, I want to say? Pet versus like livestock. Who's heard that analogy before? Because it's a bit of a weird one. The pet versus livestock analogy means when you are very close to a software, it's your best friend. You have a pillow with a logo ingrained on it. When you have a close relationship with a tool, you treat it like a pet. You give it a name. You know it by heart. You can already tell I'm going to be going with this. The problem is that when you have 1,000 tools, you can't just be close and personal with 1,000 tools. It starts to get unwieldy. The cattle mentality, or livestock mentality, whatever the official word is the mentality of like, I don't really care what their names are. They're just tools to me. It's a bit of a kind of a heartless mentality to have, but when you're working at the stature of a AAA, you can't be friendly with these tools anymore. The compartmentalization mentality is simply that. I have a bunch of tools, I don't care what they are, I need them to be as portable and as maintainable as possible. And kind of as an extension to that, one typical method that this gets used by is this world of package management. You might not have ever heard of these tools before, JFrog Artifactory and Chocolatey. I'm not selling you on Chocolate, that's an actual tool name. I recommend using it, it's actually pretty sweet. These tools, oh, nice. I take full credit for that. When we look at tools like this, package management tools, if your methodology is already to just wrap things up in boxes, then package management inherently goes with that. And it introduces a lot of amazing benefits. I won't get into them today, but I recommend if you're working on building up your scale, try playing with this kind of package management solutions like JFrog Artifactory and Chocolatey. It's just kind of like a nice thing to do. And because when you look at things like boxes, there's a very, very peculiar benefit that I want everyone to consider. In games, like the fact that we have so many tools and so many technologies, it's nearly impossible to identify every single one and to totally understand everything. No one's to try to do that. What we did at Electronic Arts and what we do in every company that I try to push for is not to understand the software, but to understand the relationships between tools, the dependencies between tools. When you're thinking about evolving a technological legacy, evolving a company, you may cut away tools, you may add tools, you may upgrade tools, or for whatever reason, you may downgrade tools. These can't be done if you just have a crazy amount of dependencies on everything. I'm sure many of you today have written a function that had way too many uses. And someday when you wanted to remove it, everything broke. I've done that too many times. And this happens, it's fine. But when we understand the relationships between things, if we compartmentalize and then just look at the wires, we grow a greater understanding of how we can manipulate our tech stack. If you break things down into boxes and you draw very clear relationships between things. If you just look at the wires, you can now manipulate your tech stack as much as you wish. And at a company like Electronic Arts, where we have hundreds of these, the more we can simplify those relationships, the better we can just keep growing. Imagine if it was a total spaghetti mess. It'd be nearly impossible to make FIFA. But through this is something that we use in really all companies. Now we're going to round off with a point of reflection. FIFA has grown a lot over the years. It's grown a lot because we did a lot. Behind the scenes, we often build a lot of crazy technologies, we write a lot of tools, we define a lot of relationships, and many of you will start to do that today as well. Today, tomorrow, maybe you already have. But I want everyone to stop for a moment and reflect that as we work, we are constantly going to be focused on the future. We're constantly going to be focused on what the next step is. Cloud computing, blockchain, Docker, whatever it may be, whatever buzzword of the day it is. We have to remember that we came from somewhere. And if you reflect on the past of EA, what we did yesterday is going to absolutely define what we can do today. And so as you move forward, as we move forward as engineers, keep that in mind. It'll go a long way. That's it. Thank you. Now I believe it's Q&A time, so if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask.
Yeah, it is Q&A time, so, okay, who has a question? Okay.
Hey. Oh, wow.
Hello.
So first of all, thanks for the talk. It was like really cool.
Thank you.
I was just wondering how was your career progress, because you didn't really mention it, and I'm just curious. Did you just get in EA? You just decided, yeah, I'm going to work in FIFA 17, and that's it? And how about your most recent work? Are you applying also these rules, to the I forgot the name, but
Phoenix Labs.
The Dauntless, yeah, Phoenix Library, yeah.
So
that was my question, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, just kind of reiterate the question so we all hear it. It was what is my career path? What was my career path? Did I just start at EA, or did I have a long-term goal with EA? Does that kind of reflect your question?
Yeah, I have a second question, but I'll get to
Perfect. I'm excited. So looking back at my career path, it is a bit confusing. I started in game design theory, which is a kind of a whole separate field than engineering. What led me down the route of FIFA is really opportunity. I didn't know much about FIFA at the time, because I largely played other genres. And so one day I saw, I had experience in modeling. I had experience in high school from doing 3D art. And there was an associate technical artist position at Electronic Arts. The sports studio was in Vancouver, so it was kind of just an easy choice. And I was like, well, they need me to learn Python. I'm going to go learn Python and apply today. And that ended up being my first career path. So it wasn't like I had a long-term, EA is going to be my dream, I'm doing it. It was literally there's a good opportunity, and I took it. And it's kind of as an addition to this. Oftentimes when I look at, especially with my career today, it's easy to be really, really focused on one particular company. Opportunity comes whether you like a company or not. And so it's nice to just be that's a good opportunity, I'm going to go for it. And to kind of answer the last part of your question, the company I work for today is a company called Phoenix Labs. And they work on an online product. And the idea of management, compartmentalization, let's say, it still exists. I still see scripts that don't have comments in them. I still see historical problems where people kind of leave and they leave a tech stack for the wind. It happens everywhere we go, and these lessons I've learned still apply. We still use technology we wrote at the beginning of the company, and I still question why they do that. It exists, it happens. So these lessons I apply everywhere I go. You'll hear me rant about them all the time.
Yeah, so my second question is more so you worked as a preservation, right? So you preserved everything. So do you think there's also value in preserving the game? So if there's a FIFA 1, 2, 3, oh, actually it's numbers now. Well okay. Yeah, so is there what's the value in maintaining a playable version of these games for instance, in EA Office? Is this valuable? Do you consider it to be valuable, older versions of the game or older builds? I don't know.
Yeah, no, awesome question. It was, do you find value in preserving old games? And absolutely, I'm really glad you asked that. So when we talk about preservation, we actually preserve it in a playable state. A long time ago, we worked on this tier model of what makes a good archive, what makes a good preserved game. Tier 1 was like, just take everything it was used and throw into a box somewhere. And that is not really valuable. Like, it's cool for reference, but when we talk about a playable game, like being able to play FIFA 5, let's say, that's kind of a weird, cool thing in itself. When we look at technology today, we see like the PlayStation 1 just got a remastered console. You can play old PlayStation 1 games. Imagine being able to not only play a game like that, but also get additional content that is suddenly like available for that game. It's those kind of interesting considerations, which is why we do the preservation. I can't obviously say what we preserved, but definitely there is value. And if anything, we can reference it for new things in the future. Sorry? Oh. We'll get there. I heard FIFA.
Hello, yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
So there could be like potential like João Felix or Cristiano Ronaldo in FIFA 1 for the first FIFA that came out. So would that be a possibility?
Well, I can't say whether we preserve FIFA 1 or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But technically, we could do things with anything we preserved.
Cool. That's it.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So due to time constraints, we're going to move Garrett to the...
I'll be in the corner over there.
Yeah, he'll be in the corner. I forgot the name, sorry. So if anyone wants to make extra questions, he'll be on the corner because I forgot the name, sorry. So we're going now to give away the prize associated with Garrett's keynote, but first, a big round of applause for Garrett's awesome keynote.